I'm a creative executive producer.
When it comes to this, you really have a bit more freedom.
The Terminator franchise had never produced a bomb. Not once. Even the sequels that disappointed fans like Terminator 3 or Salvation, all of them still made money at the box office. The franchise seemed impossible to kill. So when they announced Dark Fate, it looked like the safest bet imaginable. Arnold Schwarzenegger was coming back. Linda Hamilton was coming back for the first time since Judgment Day. James Cameron, the guy who created the whole thing, was heavily involved as a producer. After years of mediocre sequels, this was the one that was finally going to get it right. Everyone was sure of it. Dark Fate opened to $29 million. The budget was somewhere around $190 million, plus another $80 to $100 million in marketing. The movie needed $450 million just to break even. It made $261. Paramount and Skydance lost over $120 million. The franchise that had never bombed had finally bombed. So what happened? After 3 disappointing sequels, people had just stopped caring. It didn't matter that Arnold was back, didn't matter that Hamilton was back. They weren't willing to give Terminator another chance. The production itself had been a war zone. Director Tim Miller and Cameron clashed constantly. Cameron later described the editing process as one where blood was still being scrubbed off the walls. They fought over the tone, fought over the villain, fought over how to portray Sarah Connor. And Miller didn't have final cut. Cameron and Skydance boss David Ellison could overrule him whenever they wanted. The opening scene killed John Connor. That wasn't even Miller's idea, it came from above, but it was Miller's name on the movie when fans saw it and basically buried him. Miller later said he would never work with Cameron again. I wouldn't blame the guy. DreamWorks Animation had 17 hits in a row. Shrek, Madagascar, Kung Fu Panda, How to Train Your Dragon, hit after hit after hit. Even the weaker films like Shark Tale still made money. In the 2000s, DreamWorks was the second biggest animation studio after Pixar, actually beating Disney. Rise of the Guardians had one of the best pitches in animation history. The Avengers, but with childhood icons. Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, the Sandman, all teaming up to protect the children of the world. This was going to be number 18 in a row, the start of a massive new franchise. The movie made $306 million on a $145 million budget. It lost DreamWorks $87 million. $306 million in revenue, and they still lost money. How does that happen? DreamWorks had spent over $125 million on marketing, almost as much as the film cost to make. When you factor that in, a movie that technically outgrossed its production budget became one of the largest write-downs in animation history. Analysts had projected a $58 million opening weekend. The actual number was 32. DreamWorks stock dropped almost 5% in a single day. Katzenberg had to lay off more than 350 employees. He put it simply, "We had 17 hits in a row, and this is the first one that didn't work for us." Steven Spielberg had wanted to make West Side Story for years. One of the greatest directors in history, remaking one of the most beloved musicals ever made. The original West Side Story is among the highest-grossing films of all time when you adjust for inflation. This was as close to a sure thing as Hollywood gets. The movie cost $100 million. It made just $76 million worldwide. It needed $300 to break even. Nobody saw this coming. Spielberg doesn't make flops. West Side Story doesn't flop. This was supposed to sweep the box office and then sweep the Oscars. Instead, it became one of the biggest disappointments of Spielberg's career. COVID didn't help. The film was supposed to open December 2020. The pandemic pushed it back over a year. By December 2021, audiences still weren't fully comfortable going back to theaters, especially for a musical. And the release date made it worse. West Side Story opened exactly 1 week before Spider-Man: No Way Home. That was the movie everyone had been saving their return trip to theaters for. And Disney never figured out what to do about Ansel Elgort. The lead actor playing Tony had been publicly accused of sexual assault in June 2020. A woman alleged she'd had a sexual encounter with him when she was 17. Elgort denied it, called the relationship legal and consensual. Then more women came forward with similar claims. Disney tried to minimize him in the marketing, but you can't exactly hide the male lead of West Side Story. When the film opened, half the online conversation was about the allegations, not the movie. Lana Wachowski spent 18 years telling anyone who asked that she had no interest in making another Matrix movie. And then Warner Brothers made it clear they were going forward with a fourth Matrix whether she was involved or not. The studio had been shopping the project around to other directors. This was a billion-dollar IP and someone was going to cash in on it. So Wachowski agreed to come back. Her sister Lily didn't, which meant Lana was directing solo for the first time, and then she made a movie about being forced to make a movie. COVID hit a few weeks into filming and shut everything down. Wachowski apparently thought about just walking away from the whole thing, but the cast convinced her to see it through. Warner Brothers put it on HBO Max the same day it opened in theaters, so anyone who was even a little curious could just watch it at home. It was part of their Project Popcorn plan, which pissed off a lot of filmmakers that year. They lost Nolan because of it. The movie made $160 million against a $190 million budget, would have needed $400 million to break even. That same December, Spider-Man No Way Home was taking up all the air in the room, made almost $2 billion. The numbers were never going to work. Disney was absolutely sure about this one. They'd sent Luca and Turning Red straight to Disney Plus even when theaters were open, but Lightyear was going to be different. This was Buzz Lightyear, Pixar's most iconic character. This was the big theatrical comeback. Then the whole thing got swallowed by the culture wars. Lightyear has a brief same-sex kiss between two female characters. Pixar had originally cut it, but employees went public criticizing Disney over queer content during the whole Florida Don't Say Gay situation, and the scene got put back in. Disney wouldn't edit it out for other countries, so the film got banned outright in 14 markets. And China wasn't going to play it either. That's a massive slice of the global box office that just evaporated. Chris Evans, who voiced Buzz in the film, did an interview where he called the critics idiots. Conservatives started organizing boycotts. What was supposed to be a fun family movie turned into a political flashpoint. And of course, nobody wanted to touch it after that. It opened to $50 million, which might sound okay until you realize that was one of Pixar's worst openings ever. By the second weekend, it had already dropped to second place behind Jurassic World. When everything shook out, it made $118 million in the US and $226 million worldwide. The budget here was $200 million. Disney took a $106 million loss. The real problem was that Disney had trained people to wait. 3 Pixar films in a row went straight to the streaming service everyone was already paying for. Why would anyone buy a ticket when they figured Lightyear would show up on Disney Plus in a few weeks anyway? Captain Marvel pulled in $1 billion worldwide in 2019. Beat all 3 Thor movies, both Guardians films, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man Homecoming. A sequel pairing Carol Danvers with Ms. Marvel looked like a layup. But by the time the Marvels actually opened, things had changed. Marvel had been pumping out Disney Plus shows, and keeping up with them started to feel like homework. You needed to watch 2 full series just to understand what was going on in a Captain Marvel sequel. People got tired. The Marvels ended up being the first outright bomb in MCU history. $84 million domestic, $206 million worldwide. Budget was around $307 million. The production had been a mess for a while. The movie got pushed back twice. Test screenings went badly, so they did extensive reshoots. Director Nia DaCosta got sidelined during post-production, while Marvel executives stepped in on the edit. She talked about it afterward. The project was supposed to take 2 years and ended up dragging on for 3.5. The release date shifted 4 different times. The whole Marvel machine was breaking down at that point. Disney CEO had pushed the studio to pump out way more content for Disney Plus, and the visual effects houses couldn't keep up. Artists were working 14-hour days without overtime, getting paid about 20% below industry standard. They testified before Congress about the conditions. Some studios started refusing Marvel contracts entirely. People blamed the actors' strike for the weak marketing, but Barbie and Oppenheimer came out during the same strike period and did just fine. The Marvels failed because everything that could go wrong did. Mad Max Fury Road picked up a Best Picture nomination at the Oscars. Over the years that followed, its reputation just kept growing. By the time the prequel came out, it seemed like a sure thing. National Board of Review even named it one of the top 10 films of 2024. The movie opened Memorial Day weekend to $26 million, one of the worst Memorial Day numbers in years. It finished its run with 67 domestic and 174 million worldwide. That's over 200 million less than Fury Road. The studio lost around 95 million. Fury Road had made $379 million during its original theatrical run. Decent number, but nobody was calling it a phenomenon at the time. The greatest action movie ever made reputation came later. People found it on streaming, watched it over and over. Fury Road built a loyal audience. It just wasn't a big one. 9 years later, they weren't enough to carry a $168 million prequel. People connected to Furiosa because of Theron, her performance, everything about how she played that role. Asking them to show up for a different actor was the same problem that killed Solo. You can't swap out Harrison Ford and expect everyone to be fine with it. Same thing with Theron. In 2010, Scott Pilgrim looked like a sure thing. Edgar Wright was coming off Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, both of which had turned into full-blown cult classics. Universal was giving him $60 million to adapt this beloved underground comic. The cast was stacked with rising talent: Michael Cera, Aubrey Plaza, Anna Kendrick, plus Brandon Routh from Superman Returns, and this guy Chris Evans, who was about to become Captain America. Everything was lining up. The movie opened on August 13, 2010 and got destroyed by The Expendables. Scott Pilgrim came in at number 5 with $10 million. By the time it finished its run, it had made $47 million worldwide against a $60 million budget. Universal made a fundamental mistake here with the marketing. They built the entire promotional campaign around San Diego Comic-Con and nerd culture outlets. Basically, they had spent all their energy convincing fans to see a movie they were already going to see. Everyone else had no idea it existed. One executive at a rival studio said afterward that Scott Pilgrim should never have been a studio movie in the first place. The whole thing was too weird. It belonged at Focus Features, Universal's indie division, where they could have spent less money and expected less in return. $60 million was way too much for something this niche, especially during recession. The Wrap had this quote from anonymous film marketing executive, and he said in recessionary time, "Who wants to see a movie about 20-year-old slacker do-nothings who are in a band? You'd rather slap them than go watch them in a movie." Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out in 2008 and disappointed a lot of people, but it still made serious money, one of the biggest hits of that year. So when Disney announced another Indiana Jones movie 15 years later, the thinking was that the brand would carry it through, even if people weren't exactly thrilled. Dial of Destiny made $384 million worldwide. That was $400 million less than Crystal Skull, and it was nowhere close to what Disney needed. Disney produced the film in Britain to qualify for tax credits, which meant they had to file financial disclosures with the UK government. Those filings showed the real budget, somewhere between $387 and $419 million, one of the most expensive productions in film history. A huge chunk of that money went into de-aging Harrison Ford for the opening sequence set in the 40s. One source called it a black hole for the budget. By the end, they'd poured nearly $80 million into making Ford look 40 years younger for like 5 minutes of the movie. Disney's own financial filings later showed they lost $134 million, and that number doesn't include marketing, which was probably another $100 to $200 million on top. When interviewers asked Harrison Ford about the film's performance, he didn't have much to say. He just said shit happens. Before 2018, there were a few indisputable truths. The Earth revolves around the sun. What goes up must come down. And a Star Wars movie is always going to be a box office hit. All that changed when Solo hit theaters and became the first film in the franchise to bomb at the box office. It made $393 million worldwide. That would be a solid number for most films, but Solo had a $300 million budget. The budget got that high because Disney essentially made the movie twice. Phil Lord and Chris Miller were the original directors. They'd had huge success with the Lego Movie and 21 Jump Street, so they seemed like a safe bet. But their approach was improvisational and comedy-forward, and it clashed with what Lucasfilm wanted. So they fired Lord and Miller about 80% of the way through principal photography and brought in Ron Howard to take over. Howard ended up reshooting 70% of the film on a compressed schedule. That's how the budget ballooned to $300 million. The timing made things worse. Solo came out just 5 months after The Last Jedi, which had split the fan base down the middle. Lots of people actively boycotting anything Lucasfilm made. On top of that, the whole premise asked audiences to accept someone other than Harrison Ford as Han Solo. A lot of people refused to do that from the moment the casting was announced. Alden Ehrenreich never had a chance.